the mysterious wanderer, awaiting the four brave hobbits in Bree, the adopted son of Elrond, Estel, Aragorn, Elessar. This character from the saga of the War of the Ring has so many names and guises that the mind struggles to encompass his journey. The only thing known for certain about him is that he fights selflessly to ward off the shadow of Sauron from his homeland. This is the story of a man who journeyed from an unknown ranger to a royal crown. This is the story of the heir of the ancient kings of Númenor, who never succumbed to evil. This is the story of a ruler who closed the circle of events that began with Beren and Lúthien. It is the path of an individual who follows prophecy and never breaks oaths. In ancient times, during the First Age, the second children of Eru Ilúvatar awoke. These children were humans, endowed with the gift of death. According to the creator's design, this gift allowed humans to control their own fate, without being bound by the music of the Ainur. The spirits of men, after rebirth, could freely leave Arda to create their own worlds. But the interference of the dark Ainur Morgoth prevented Ilúvatar's design in the minds of men. Under the influence of the first enemy, men began to fear death and curse the creator. They hated the elves for their immortality and turned their backs on the light. Only a few managed to resist the call of evil. They settled in Beleriand and closely tied their fate to the firstborn, joining them in an exhausting struggle against darkness. These people were called Edain by the elves, the three branches of the Edain: the House of Beor, the House of Haleth, and the House of Hador, remained loyal to the Eldar and unfailingly participated in the many wars of the First Age. Mixed marriages between men and elves even appeared. The most famous was the union of Beren of the House of Beor with the divine-born daughter of King Eleuthingol Lúthien. This blood-stained marriage was marked in history only by their granddaughter, Elwing, who managed to preserve her life and the Silmaril. Another descendant of mixed marriages was the famous Eärendil. He was the son of the man Tuor and the elf Idril, whose ancestors were Finwë of the Noldor and Indis of the Vanyar. Perhaps it was his blood that made it difficult for his descendants to live peacefully in Middle-earth. In dire times, Eärendil and Elwing had twin sons, Elrond and Elros. The young half-elves had to endure the attack on their native havens of Sirion and captivity. After that, the War of Wrath broke out, destroying Beleriand. In fierce battles, Morgoth was captured and sent into the void beyond the universe. The Blessed Amen was also removed from Middle-earth forever. Many elves departed to Valinor. But what about the Edain? A fair question arises. As a reward for their selflessness, the Valar granted them an island in the Western Sea. This island was located both here and there. It was not quite in Middle-earth, yet it was close to Tol Eressëa, though the feet of mortals could still not step onto the lands of Valinor. The Valar did not reward the Edain with just an island. All those who originally belonged to the three houses received, as a reward for their loyalty, a very long lifespan. The kings, descendants of Elros, became particularly long-lived. This half-elf chose the fate of a man and became the ruler of Tar Miniatur. Thus, Númenor, the kingdom of mariners, appeared on the world map. White ships from Tol Eressëa regularly arrived on Númenor's shores. One day they brought with them a sapling of the white tree. It was planted in the capital and given the name Nimloth. Daring explorers, the Númenorians, soon found their way back to Middle-earth. There they met the last king of the Noldor, Gil-galad, the elves of Lindon, and other peoples. They began teaching and supporting the wild men of Middle-earth. Alas, the idyll did not last long. Perhaps the influence of Morgoth eventually touched Dúnedain. Or perhaps the reason was Sauron, who infiltrated the island through deception and spent many years secretly corrupting its people. The kings of Númenor changed, their eyes now toward Amun with envy and malice. The ruling dynasty and the people of Númenor split into the faithful and the king's men. The island's rulers began to govern the conquered lands of Middle-earth with an iron fist, sowing horror and hatred in the hearts of the mainland's inhabitants. Even Sauron's exposure brought no relief. The rings had already been forged, and the seeds of darkness had fallen on fertile soil. The Númenorians were strong. They actively pushed back the Dark Lord in Middle-earth, and so he laid a cunning trap for the last king of Númenor, Ar-Pharazôn. Taken captive, he redirected the king's aggression westward, and Ar-Pharazôn attempted to seize Amun by force. Even the very thought of it sounds absurd, doesn't it? After this military campaign of men, the Valar renounced Middle-earth, and Amun was forever removed from Arda. Númenor, meanwhile, was swallowed by the sea, cast down by the wrath of Manwë. The forces of light do not punish the faithful, and some Númenorians who believed in the light were saved. Among them was Elendil, the last lord of Andúnie, and his two sons, Isildur and Anarion. The arduous journey from the doomed Númenor separated the father and his sons. The brothers landed in the south at Pelargir, while the father eventually reached the north in Lindon. Thus, two great kingdoms of men appeared on the map of Middle-earth, Gondor and Arnor. Upon setting foot on land, Elendil swore in Quenya, "From the great sea I have come to Middle-earth. In this place, I and my heirs shall dwell until the end of the world." He brought with him relics from Tol Eressëa, the Palantiri, the scepter of Annúminas, the ring of Barahir, and the sword of Narsil. He also managed to preserve a sapling of Nimloth, the white tree of Númenor. The kingdom of men was vast, so it was immediately divided by the High King Elendil into two parts. Isildur ruled the north Arnor. Anarion governed the southern Gondor. This was roughly the fate of the Númenorians by the end of the Second Age. However, darkness was advancing. Sauron, having gathered great forces in Mordor, moved to conquer all of Middle-earth. In the decisive battle, the last king of the Noldor and the High King of Men, Elendil, perished. With the shattered Narsil, Isildur cut the One Ring from the Dark Lord's hand, thus disembodying Sauron for many centuries. Thus ended the Second Age. Unfortunately, the shadow still stretched its wings over the former Númenorians. Deceived by the treacherous ring, Isildur became its first victim in the Third Age. The kingdoms of Arnor and Gondor continued to exist separately, growing ever more distant from one another. The death of Eärendil of Arnor in 861 of the Third Age divided the kingdom into three parts. In the first, Arthedain, the direct descendants of Isildur, remained on the throne. They continued to claim authority over the other two kingdoms, Rhudaur and Cardolan. The Witch King of Angmar was quick to exploit this internal strife. Slowly but surely, in the middle of the Third Age, evil once again began to rise. After the Angmar War, the kingdoms of Cardolan and Rhudaur ceased to exist. In 1974 of the Third Age, after 700 years of struggle, the Witch King of Angmar destroyed Arthedain as well. The heir of Arthedain, Aranarth, decided not to take the crown and instead became the leader of the northern Dúnedain, a community of Númenorian descendants who maintained close ties with the elves of Rivendell. And why wouldn't they, when the ruler of Rivendell, Elrond half-elven, was the brother of Aranarth's distant ancestor? The royal relics were sent under the shade of the elven trees, and the last kings became chieftain of the Dúnedain, scouts, and wandering warriors. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, the son of the 15th chieftain of the Dúnedain, was born in 2931 of the Third Age. He never met his father, who perished on a military raid. The young chieftain's mother, Gilrain, took her son to be raised in Rivendell, possessing the gift of foresight. His grandmother, Eorwen, believed that her grandson was the last hope for the world's victory over Sauron, and many who remembered the last alliance understood all too well that Sauron had been defeated, but not destroyed. To hide Isildur's heir from the watchful eye of the mysterious necromancer of Dol Guldur, the young Dúnedain was given the name Estel. Even though evil could not touch Rivendell, which was protected by an elven ring, this precaution was not unnecessary. Estel spent his tender years with Elrond, who raised him as his own son. The grown Dúnedain continued to accompany Elrond's sons on their expeditions against the ever-multiplying spawns of darkness. By the time he was 21, his elven kin presented the young man with several gifts, believing him ready to follow his destined path. Elrond revealed to his foster son the secret of his name. Along with his true name, Aragorn received the relics of his house, the Ring of Barahir and the Shards of Narsil. The Scepter of Annúminas, however, was yet to be earned. The very next day, the newly inspired young Dúnedain encountered Arwen Undomiel. The daughter of Elrond had just returned from Lothlórien, and she fit so perfectly into the ballad Aragorn was singing about Beren and Luthien that he was lost forever. The young man had not yet considered that his love for Arwen would close the circle of the ages and finally separate the Eldar and the Dain. From this moment on, Aragorn officially took his true name and the title of the 16th chieftain of the Dúnedain. Wasting no time on lengthy preparations, he set out on a long journey across the dangerous lands of the Wild West, missing the White Council of 2953. By this time, Saruman the White, already tainted by darkness, had managed to convince the Council that the One Ring had sunk into the Anduin and was lost at sea. This temporarily lulled the vigilance of the wise and diverted suspicion away from Bilbo Baggins's ring. Saruman then withdrew to Isengard and bided his time. Aragorn and Gandalf the Grey met only in 2956. The wise Istari advised his young friend to pay attention to the Shire, and the Ranger chieftain did not refuse this request. From then on, he regularly visited the strange, hairy-footed folk who came to call him Strider. Not a very pleasant nickname for a king, is it? But the secret of his heritage would remain undisclosed for a long time yet. From 2956 onward, Aragorn participated in many battles against the Dark Forces, which had begun to gather strength after Sauron's spirit returned to Barad-dûr. He served the king of Rohan, Thengel, and the steward of Gondor, Ecthelion II. In these eastern lands, the growing power of Mordor was especially evident. Within Gondor itself, unrest was brewing, and Saruman the White played his part in its decline by seizing control over the mind of Steward Denethor, subtly nudging Ecthelion's son toward darkness. He fostered a deep distrust in Denethor toward Gandalf the Grey. The same mistrust extended to Aragorn, who was known in Gondor as Thorongil, the Eagle of the Star. Aragorn wore a silver star on his cloak, and his skills as a warrior and ranger earned him fame both on land and at sea. But alas, they did not win him the friendship of Gondor's future ruler. After dealing a serious blow to the Corsairs of Umbar, who were inclined toward evil, Aragorn left Gondor and set off deep into enemy lands for reconnaissance. It was only in the year 2980 of the Third Age that the 16th chieftain of the Dúnedain returned to Rivendell. On his journey, he was fortunate enough to visit Lothlórien and see Arwen once again. In a contemplative harmony with nature, the lovers spent the summer together. In the middle of the season, Aragorn presented the elf maiden with the Ring of Barahir, one of the ancestral relics of the Lords of Dúnedain. This ring, an ancient elven artifact, had been forged in Valinor and once belonged to the Noldorin lord Finrod Felagund. As a token of gratitude for saving his life, Finrod had gifted it to the Addan Barahir, father of Beren. Having passed through all the ages of Middle-earth, this relic was not only a symbol of a marriage proposal, it also served as a reminder to the half-elven descendants that the Circle of Fate was nearing its completion. Sharing the feelings of Isildur's heir, Arwen accepted the proposal with joy. Like many of the descendants of Eärendil and Elwing, she possessed the gift of foresight and was prepared to embrace her fate. Her father, Elrond half-elven, was far less enthusiastic about the betrothal, but the gift his daughter possessed burdened Elrond as well. In deep sorrow over the inevitable outcome of this story, the Lord of Rivendell gave his blessing to Aragorn and Arwen's decision, but with one condition: Aragorn must become king of both Arnor and Gondor. Only the true heir of Isildur was worthy of his daughter's hand. Did Elrond secretly hope that the condition would be beyond the reach of the Dúnedain? Did he comfort himself with the thought that in the long years to come, Arwen might change her mind about accepting a mortal's fate and sail west with him? And what did 2 or 3 more decades mean to an elf maiden who had been waiting for her destiny for thousands of years? Dreams were dreams, but the events in Middle-earth continued to unfold in their own way, inexorably moving toward catastrophe. At the beginning of the 4th millennium of the Third Age, Gandalf the Grey, together with Aragorn, made yet another attempt to track down Gollum. The ring, which had so conveniently passed from this creature to the hobbit Bilbo, seemed highly suspicious to the Istari. The wizard suspected that this artifact was, in fact, the One Ring of Sauron, contrary to the assurances of Saruman the White. In the year 3007, Aragorn, preoccupied with pressing matters, barely managed to visit his mother in Eriador. That same year, she passed away. 2 years later, the Ranger and the Istari resumed their active search for Gollum, but at the time, their efforts proved unsuccessful. Led by some dark force in his attempts to reclaim the ring, Gollum wandered into Mordor, and of course, ended up in the clutches of Sauron, who no longer concealed his return. For 8 long years, Aragorn and Gandalf scoured Middle-earth in vain until at last the creature, having been released by Sauron, was captured by the Ranger in the Dead Marshes. Hoping to keep his prisoner hidden from the Dark Lord's spies, Aragorn undertook a long journey with Gollum to the Misty Mountains. Here, Gandalf attempted to interrogate Gollum, but the stubborn creature revealed little. From his incoherent threats, interspersed with weeping over his precious, little useful information could be gleaned. However, the most crucial detail was uncovered. Under torture, Gollum had told Sauron who had stolen the ring from him, and now the fiery eye had turned its gaze toward the Shire. Leaving Gollum under the guard of Thranduil's elves, Aragorn set out at Gandalf's request to meet the hobbits. The company of Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin was just preparing to depart from the Shire for Rivendell. Of course, the wise Istari had intended to accompany the hobbits to Rivendell himself, but urgent matters detained him. Seeking to learn as much as possible about the One Ring and its history, Gandalf the Grey fell into the trap of the traitor Saruman. The responsibility of protecting the hobbits and their dangerous burden thus fell upon Aragorn. The Hobbit company had just stopped in Bree when Aragorn attempted to make contact with them, but Frodo was a wary creature. Having already encountered the Nazgul a couple of times, the cautious hobbit was unwilling to trust him. His friends only added fuel to the fire. They advised Frodo not to believe the Strider and not to accept his offer of guidance. The situation was salvaged by Gandalf's foresight. understanding that he might not arrive in time, he had left a letter for Frodo with the owner of the prancing pony in Bree. However, the innkeeper had forgotten to deliver it to its recipient. Nevertheless, the situation was eventually resolved. The innkeeper finally recalled the wizard's message. With great difficulty, and aided by the letter from the hobbits' beloved Gandalf, Aragorn managed to prove to them that he was not an enemy. Even some ancient verses came in handy. All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken. A light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king. At last, Aragorn was acknowledged and accepted as their companion. But then he had to explain to Frodo once again why he must not put on the ring. Alas, these warnings would go unheeded. As if it weren't enough that in Bree, Merry managed to get caught by the Black Riders, who were only driven away by another hobbit working at the inn, the hobbits, whom Aragorn had failed to intercept in time, caused even more trouble during their evening feast. Due to their careless behavior, certain dark figures in Bree discovered who was really hiding under the name Underhill. Spending the night at the inn had become unsafe. However, venturing out into the night, when the Nazgûl were at their strongest, was also unwise. The hobbits were fortunate to heed Aragorn's advice and decided to sleep in his room instead. By morning, their own bedrooms had been ransacked. This incident earned Aragorn additional trust from his hairy-footed companions, and the group, led by the ranger, set off in the morning. Aragorn convinced the hobbits that traveling straight ahead with him would be the safest route. Not that it took much persuasion. The Nazgûl, who were following Frodo's trail, were dangerous not only in themselves. From the moment Sauron openly declared himself, the shadow had begun to creep across Middle-earth once more. And as in ancient times, it corrupted the souls of men. Those who were seduced by the Dark Lord became his agents, sowers of corruption and spies for the Nazgûl. In such an atmosphere, the best option for the group was to disappear into the deep forests. Aragorn led the hobbits toward Weathertop, managing to mislead their pursuers along the way. And of course, everything might have worked if not for Frodo. The weight of the ring bore down on the hobbit, compelling him to act strangely. The group spent the night on Amon Sul, amidst the ruins of an ancient border fortress. Aragorn and the hobbits, distracted by a fresh inscription on a stone, failed to notice the enemy's approach. And though the ranger explained that the fire could ward off the ring wraiths, the company nearly lost Frodo that night. The Witch King, the chief of the ring wraiths, forced young Baggins to put on the cursed artifact once again. Though Aragorn managed to drive off the Nazgûl, Frodo was grievously wounded by their enchanted blade. The Morgul daggers of the ringwraiths drained the souls of their victims, leaving them empty husks. The company had to hurry. For 12 days, the travelers fled from the Nazgûl, carrying the fading ring-bearer with them. Aragorn might not have succeeded in his task had it not been for a friend who came to his aid. The ancient Noldorin elf Glorfindel, who had perished in the First Age and was reborn, was nearly as powerful as the Maiar. Thanks to his help, the hobbits narrowly avoided an ambush at the river Bruinen. As the swift Asfaloth carried the wounded Frodo away from pursuit, Aragorn and Glorfindel worked together to trap the Nazgûl. Using simple fire, the Dúnedain and the hobbits drove the Black Riders' horses into the river, while Glorfindel summoned a mighty wave that swept the enemy away. Just before losing consciousness, Frodo witnessed the great power of the resurrected elf. However, without Aragorn's vast knowledge of healing herbs, the ring-bearer would not have reached the ford alive. The Fellowship of the Ring shall be 9, and the 9 walkers shall oppose the 9 Black Riders, said Elrond half-elven at the legendary council in Rivendell. This council became the starting point of Aragorn's rise. Here, he also found loyal friends for many years to come. Here, the truth of Saruman's betrayal was revealed to the forces of light, brought by the newly freed Gandalf. Here, the elves of Rivendell took the shards of Narsil from the Dúnedain to reforge them. Thus, ancient prophecies began to unfold. Thus, Strider became Isildur's heir in the eyes of the enemies of darkness. Setting out on the long journey, Aragorn took with him the reforged sword and named it Andúril. The blade gleamed red in the sunlight, and its name meant Flame of the West. No matter how brightly hope burned in the hearts of those who embarked on the quest, no one expected an easy road ahead. Along the way, Aragorn not only had to protect the ring-bearer from enemies, but also to engage in a constant struggle with Denethor's heir. Boromir of Gondor, burning with hatred for the Dark Lord, had been misled by Saruman's cunning deceptions. The future steward also refused to acknowledge Aragorn as the rightful king. This greatly complicated the life of Isildur's heir, who had to ensure the unity of the Fellowship. Nevertheless, in the fierce battles on Caradhras and in Moria, Boromir proved himself to be a formidable warrior. When the Fellowship was forced to turn toward Moria, Aragorn's thoughts were occupied with other concerns. The knowledge he had gathered during his wanderings foretold nothing good about Moria. This was further exacerbated by the reason for Gimli's presence in Rivendell. King Dain had stopped receiving messages from Balin, who had gone to reclaim Khazad-dûm. With a heavy heart, Aragorn and his companions entered the mines. His fears were soon confirmed. The entire journey through Moria was fraught with battles against goblins and other foul creatures, but the greatest loss struck when the Balrog appeared. Of course, when taking up the mantle of leadership for the Fellowship, Aragorn understood that only Gandalf could have truly dealt with the curse of Durin. But understanding did not lessen the sorrow of the loss. Aragorn led the Fellowship out of Moria and onward to Lothlórien, grieving for his friend. The arrival of strangers in the Elven woods did not go unnoticed. The woodland sentries detained the diminished Fellowship near the border. Had they not recognized Legolas as kin, the conversation could have taken a very different turn. But their troubles were not yet over. The guards of Lothlórien flatly refused to allow a dwarf into their forest. The old enmity between the woodland elves and the somewhat greedy dwarves still ran deep. Where the diplomatic skills of the elven prince failed, the future king had to intervene. Aragorn gracefully diffused the conflict by proposing that the guards blindfold the entire company, not just the dwarf. Yes, they would be deprived of the chance to gaze upon the wonders of the enchanted forest, but at least they would arrive safely before Lady Galadriel, who was already awaiting them with great anticipation. Under the dense canopies of the Malorn trees, the Guardians found shelter and rest. They had passed the trial and gazed into Galadriel's magical mirror. They walked through the peaceful forest and slept calmly in their tent. But all good things must come to an end. The journey had to continue. As a farewell, each received precious gifts from the lady. The heir of Isildur was given a sheath for Andúril, crafted by the masters of the Noldor. It protected the sword and kept it from dulling. The sheath was beautiful and valuable, but Aragorn received an even more important relic, the elven stone Elessar, defining the name of the future king. This stone, a continuation of the prophecy of the return of the true ruler, was created in the First Age in Gondolin, belonged to the mother of Eärendil. During the Second Age, the stone resided in Valinor, but the Vala Yavanna sent it back to Middle-earth at the beginning of the Third. The Maya Olorin, who became Gandalf the Astari, passed Elessar to Galadriel, signifying that the Valar had not forsaken their beloved offspring. The elven stone Elessar had healing properties, and, by the design of the Valar, it was to be passed on to a king who would assume the name Elessar. Another thread of destiny stretched deep into the ages, firmly connecting Aragorn with his half-elven ancestors. They spent just a month in the lands shielded from evil. After some rest, the group left Lothlórien and reached the Anduin without significant trouble. Here, at the Falls of Rauros, another heated argument erupted. The son of the steward of Gondor, Boromir, once again insisted that they should head to Minas Tirith. He tried to convince the Fellowship that the ring needed to be used against the enemy. It was these thoughts that the darkness-affected Saruman had whispered to his father for years. Disagreeing with the idea of using the dangerous artifact, Aragorn was nonetheless ready to agree that the route to Mordor via Minas Tirith made sense. However, he left the final decision to Frodo. Perhaps Aragorn was to blame for not keeping a closer eye on Boromir and for not noticing the shadow in his heart in time. Perhaps the treacherous ring orchestrated the events. But ultimately, fate had its way. Just when everyone decided to go with Frodo, a repentant Boromir returned and reported that Frodo had disappeared. Aragorn and Sam rushed to search for him. The hobbit eluded the ranger. Sam guessed where the keeper had gone, but the Dúnedain did not. The two hobbits safely crossed the river, but Merry and Pippin were attacked by orcs, the very ones that Frodo's blade had sensed in the night. What could two hobbits, who had never left their burrows before, do against trained warriors? Exactly nothing. The mighty Boromir was left alone to face an armed-to-the-teeth squad and lost. When Aragorn arrived from the hilltop where he had tried to spot the missing Frodo, it was all over. Like a true king, he accepted Boromir's last breath and repentance. The dying man managed to tell him that the young hobbits had been captured alive, but he knew nothing of the keeper's fate. Gimli and Legolas returned, having chased the orcs into the woods. At that moment, the experienced ranger was at a loss. A wave of despair overwhelmed Aragorn. He sincerely did not understand what to do next. Chase after Frodo and Sam, head to Gondor, or try to save Merry and Pippin. Help came from his friends. Legolas, with true elven wisdom, suggested that they first bury the fallen. When the morning song ended and a boat carried Boromir's body down to the Anduin, Aragorn's mind cleared. Together with the elf and the dwarf, he carefully examined the battle site and the fallen enemies. The friends were in for an unpleasant discovery. Their enemies had increased. The heir of Isildur realized that from the misty mountains, a new, well-armed foe threatened the forces of light. The decision came easily. They needed to catch up with the orc squad that had captured Took and Brandybuck. They needed to figure out what new type of orcs Saruman had created in the darkness of Isengard. They needed to return the young hobbits their Númenorian blades, which the captors could not touch. With a purpose regained, Aragorn once again became that leader of the Dúnedain, a calm and collected commander, and his warriors matched him, the wise elf and the warrior dwarf. The company called themselves the Three Hunters, and without further delay, rushed in pursuit. The orc tracks led through the hills of Emin Muil towards Rohan. There was no time to lose, and the team sped across the rocky wastelands without sleep or rest. Until at dawn, they descended into the Eastamnet. Here, Aragorn found an elven brooch deliberately left by Pippin in hopes of help from friends. Until evening, the three followed the orc trail, but they had to stop for the night. Aragorn realized that there was no good decision in this situation. In the night's darkness, even the sharp vision of the elf could not keep them on track. Waiting until morning meant possibly losing the orcs, who moved very swiftly. As if the evil will of Saruman lent the vile creature's strength, the hunter squad felt a vicious pressure, noticeably slowing them down. Eventually, Aragorn decided to stop for the night. The endless, and seemingly hopeless, chase across the plains lasted for 3 days. The Uruks had gone far ahead, and it seemed that nothing could save Merry and Pippin from the dubious hospitality of Orthanc. However, fortune favored the three hunters. On the morning of the third day, the keen elven eyes spotted riders. Men. A large, well-armed company was moving from the ancient Fangorn towards Edoras. The elf and the ranger recognized them as warriors of Rohan. Aragorn sincerely believed the Rohirrim to be his allies, unaware of what was happening in the halls of Meduseld. The three friends were lucky to meet Eomer, the outcast nephew of the king of Rohan. At first, Eomer regarded the strange company with hostility. His people were equally distrustful of orcs, elves, and dwarves. This time, diplomacy alone was not enough, and so the shining Anduril left its sheath. Drawing forth the reforged sword, Aragorn, for the first time since the Fellowship of the Ring began its journey, revealed his true name. The unexpected appearance of the king foretold by prophecy astonished Eomer, but he believed the travelers. He also believed Aragorn's claim that they had covered 200 kilometers on foot in 3 days, for in their measures, 45 leagues meant just that. With the light remark of the Rohirrim, Isildur's heir became the Winged One. Eomer told Aragorn that the shadow had also fallen upon Edoras. The agent of the wicked Saruman had clouded the mind of King Theoden and sapped his strength. The wizard himself frequently appeared in the plains, assuming different guises. Aragorn had a hard time convincing the Rohirrim that he could not accompany them to the capital at that moment. The fate of the abducted hobbits was of little concern to the riders of Rohan, but Eomer let the hunters go. As a sign of trust, he lent them 2 riderless horses, on the promise that Aragorn would soon arrive in Edoras. With that, they parted ways. With a heavy heart, the future king of men and his friends made their way toward Fangorn Forest. There, on the edge of the woods, the Rohirrim had slain and burned the orcs whom the 3 hunters had been pursuing. The company reached the edge of the forest by nightfall, and apart from the smoldering embers, little else could be discerned. Aragorn decided to camp in the woods and search for tracks in the morning. There was still hope that the hobbits were alive, as the Rohirrim had not seen their bodies among the slain. During the night, a ghostly man in grey visited their camp. The ranger invited him to the fire, but he vanished. The friends spent a restless night. To make matters worse, their horses had disappeared. At dawn, the team, led by Aragorn, ventured deeper into the forest. They received joyous news. The hobbits had survived, managed to escape, and flee. However, they had fled into the forest. With relentless determination, Aragorn resolved to continue the search in the ancient woods. Yet fate had prepared a different path for him. Following Merry and Pippin's trail, Aragorn did not immediately realize that the company was moving in circles. And then the old man appeared again. Wary from fruitless searching, the 3 hunters initially mistook him for Saruman. 3 times the old man addressed the travelers, and 3 times they did not believe him. But then Anduril flared with bright light, and the truth was revealed to the future king. Before them stood Gandalf. A long conversation on the hill somewhat reassured Aragorn. Gandalf told his friends of the fate of the young hobbits. These mischievous creatures had managed to stir up the ancient forest, and now Saruman was in for an unpleasant surprise. Gandalf brought much news to the hunters, and personally he carried a message for Aragorn from the Golden Wood. Elessar, Elessar, where is your proud people, burned now with wandering and sorrow? The hour is near. Hooves thunder on the roads. From the north rides your grey company. Your path leads to the sea, shrouded in darkness, where the dead sentinels stand unshaken. Now, Aragorn faced a different path, one that led directly to his throne, or to his doom. From Fangorn, Aragorn, the elf, the dwarf, and the wizard set out for Edoras. Aragorn fulfilled his promise, along with Gandalf's horse. The steeds of Eomer were also returned to their riders. Aragorn did not partake in breaking the spell over King Theoden, for he was no sorcerer. However, he did reveal himself once again to his people. The attempt of the guards to seize Anduril nearly ended in a skirmish. Here, in the Golden Hall of Meduseld, Aragorn met Eowyn, the young niece of the king of the Rohirrim. The maiden fell in love with him at first sight, but in the heart of Isildur's heir, there was room only for the fair Arwen. Caring little for matters of the heart, Aragorn set out for war once more. The enemy had besieged the stronghold of the Rohirrim, Hornburg. In an almost hopeless battle, the future king nearly perished. Yet, even in the moments of despair, he did not lose his resolve. In this final battle, the ability of Elendil's descendant to inspire not only men, but also the elves who had come to aid from Lothlórien was fully revealed. The timely arrival of Marshal of the West, Erkenbrand, and the Huorns turned the tide at Helm's Deep. Saruman's army was destroyed, and Aragorn and his friends made their way to the ruined Isengard. There, they found the two younger hobbits, alive, well, and visibly matured. The final realization of himself as the true king came to Aragorn after his visit to Isengard. There, he received yet another ancient elven relic brought from Númenor by his ancestors. Though the Palantir had been tainted by Sauron's evil will, Isildur's heir accepted it without hesitation. He now understood that he was embarking on a path distinct from those of Gandalf, the hobbits, and the Rohirrim. For now, Theoden's army was returning victorious to Edoras. The arrival of the northern Dúnedain, led by Halbarad and the sons of Elrond, strengthened Aragorn's resolve to follow his destiny. Upon meeting him, they brought a message from the Lord of Imladris. "Father, bid me tell you, the time is near. If haste is needed, remember the paths of the dead," said Elrohir upon their encounter. The wheel of fate had turned, and the king could no longer turn back, no matter how much the beautiful Eowyn begged him to take her with him. Aragorn was firm in his decision. He could not accept her love, nor her help. The dangerous path through the paths of the dead awaited him, and it was meant to lead to the final battle against evil. With Aragorn on the campaign were his faithful companions, Gimli, Legolas, and the Grey Company of Halbarad. The sons of Elrond also accompanied their kinsmen. A fearsome journey lay ahead. The ancient Oathbreakers of Dunharrow waited for the true king beyond the dark door in the caves of Dwemerberg. Gathering all his courage, Aragorn walked to the Stone of Eirek. There, he called upon the dead and commanded them to fulfill their oath. He promised to give them peace once not a trace of Sauron's servants remains in these lands. "I am Elessar, the heir of Isildur and king of Gondor. I command you, follow me." And they followed, sweeping across the coastline under the banner of the White Tree. The dead army of King Elessar bravely fought against the corsairs of Umbar and other enemies. The dead were granted peace, and the king sailed on the captured ships to the Pelennor fields, where another hopeless battle was raging. Now it was Aragorn's turn to turn the tide of the battle, and he did so brilliantly. The army's spirits were lifted, and the remnants of the enemy forces were defeated. A true king is not known in battle. This truth was learned by Aragorn, who, with the gift of the Elven Stone, gained the power of hearing. Tirelessly, the former warrior healed the bodies and souls of Gondor's fearless defenders. The hands of the king are the hands of a healer, and thus shall the true king be recognized. This ancient prophecy was still believed in Gondor. Aragorn, now King Elessar, believed it as well. From the overwhelming darkness, he raised to the light the Lady of Rohan, Eowyn, who had been wounded by the Lord of the Nazgul. He healed Faramir, the second son of the steward Denethor, from a mortal wound, and many others, like the divine Eärendil, were healed by Aragorn that day. And throughout the city, a whisper began to grow. The king has returned. Unfortunately, the war did not end with the death of the Ringwraith king. Though his army was defeated, there were still other Nazgul, still countless armies in Mordor, and no one knew the fate of the One Ring and its bearer. Little hope remained for the free peoples, for while the ring existed, all was in vain. Did Aragorn understand this when he gathered his allies in Dol Amroth? Of course, he did. But the wave of destiny had already swept him along. The decision made was not such a bad one. To ease Frodo's path to Mount Doom, the council decided to draw the orcs out of Mordor. This led to the battle at Morannon. It seemed like a suicidal endeavor, but no. The king and his allies had calculated everything correctly. They managed to divert the forces of darkness, and most importantly, Sauron himself from Mount Doom. Finally, the ring fell into the volcano's fiery chasm. Barad-dûr was destroyed. Sauron was disembodied forever. With the destruction of the One Ring, all the other rings lost their power. The Nazgûl perished, the orcs and goblins fled in fear. Alas, the power of the 3 elven rings was also lost. On the field of the Cormalin, the surviving heroes, Frodo and Sam, were celebrated. Aragorn was crowned at the gates of Minas Tirith as King Elessar. This year, the year of hard battles and bitter losses, became the last year of the Third Age of Middle-earth. Several days passed after the coronation, and Gandalf brought his gift to the sovereign. On the slopes of Mount Mindolluin, a new sapling of the White Tree of Gondor was growing. Soon after, Aragorn met dear guests. Elrond handed him the scepter of Annúminas and the hand of his daughter. The long-awaited wedding took place on the day of the summer solstice. Arwen embraced her mortal fate, just as Eärendil had embraced the fate of an elf in ancient times. The circle was closed. The Fourth Age of Middle-earth began, the Age of Men. The elves of the Noldor, along with many Sindar, set off for the Grey Havens to sail into the west. Along with them, the Ring-bearers, the brave Bilbo and Frodo Baggins, sailed beyond the Great Sea, beyond the confines of Arda. In the new Kingdom of Men, King Elessar still had much work ahead. The long life of the Dúnedain allowed Aragorn to restore the lands of Middle-earth, to rebuild what was destroyed, and to establish lasting peace between the peoples. The first thing the sovereign did was to restore the Tower of Orthanc and return the Palantir there. Among the treasures accumulated by Saruman, the king's friend, the dwarf Gimli, found the family treasure of the ruling house of Arnor, the Star of Elendil. It had been removed from Isildur's body by the servants of the wizard after he drowned in the Anduin. A copy of the relic, made in Rivendell, was worn by Aragorn in his everyday life. The original was used for solemn occasions. Having restored the kingdoms of Arnor, Elessar appointed the loyal Faramir as the steward of Gondor. He was also granted the title of Prince of Ithilien. Aragorn also revived the Great Council of Gondor, headed by the steward. Much evil and undead had to be cleared from all the lands, so Elessar's reign was peaceful, but restless. The king granted forgiveness to the Esterlings and made peace with the Haradrim. He made the Dúnedain forest a protected territory of the Dúnedain. He formed a new alliance with Rohan, sealed by the oath of Cirion. Aragorn did not forget the hobbits. The Shire was declared free land, where no man could tread without an invitation. In the flourishing Kingdom of Light, the son of King Elessar, Eldarion, and several daughters were born. King Elessar and Arwen Undomiel founded a new dynasty, Telcontar. The rough nickname, Strider, given to Aragorn by the hobbits, was elegantly translated by King Elessar into Quenya. It became Telcontar, meaning the Guardian. Thus, with a smile on his face, the former ranger smoothed over diplomatic rough edges. The Dúnedain Aragorn, heir of the last true Númenóreans, lived long and ruled under the name of King Elessar for a full 122 years. When his time came, he died a happy man, in peace and calm. In the same year, Arwen, the even star of the elves, who had embraced the mortal gift of her husband, passed away. Their souls were reunited and traveled to other worlds, which the firstborn children of Ilúvatar could not reach. A long and fulfilling life was lived by Aragorn, son of Arathorn. He walked many roads and changed many forms. Estel, Aragorn, Strider, King Elessar, no matter the guise, at no point did this son of man succumb to darkness. He broke no oaths, told no lies, and never hid behind his friends in battle. Tall as the ancient sea kings, he towered over all who were near him. He seemed ancient, yet in the prime of his strength, wisdom shone on his brow. Strength and healing were in his hands, and around him spread light. This is how King Elessar will remain in the memories of the peoples of Middle-earth. And that's all from me. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell. Your activity is the best reward for me. Thank you for your attention. See you soon. Goodbye.